Good morning, everyone. The theme for this morning's meditation is God's inclusive promise, embracing the outcast. The world is changing fast, yet exclusion remains. Many struggle with identity not because God rejects them, but because of human barriers. Isaiah 56 verse 4 to 5 reveals God's heart for the excluded, offering restoration and belonging. If God welcomes the rejected, shouldn't we? Are we building bridges or reinforcing walls in our churches today? Do our lives reflect God's inclusiveness, or are we contributing silent exclusion? Who do we call as outsiders in our churches today? Those without families, the poor, the disabled, or those who don't fit in traditional expectations? Keeping this question in mind, let us see the context of Isaiah 56. Isaiah 56 marks a pivotal shift from God's restoration to Israel's to a greater vision, salvation to all. In the previous chapter, Israel's return from the exile and the redemptive role of the suffering servant were emphasized. Now Isaiah 56 declares that God's covenant is not only for Israel, but also for the eunuchs and the foreigners who were excluded ones. According to Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 1, eunuchs were once prohibited from participating in Israel's religious life because they could not have children, meaning they have no lasting inheritance. Likewise, foreigners were also seen as outsiders unless they adopt Israel's customs. To understand this passage, we will explore three sections. The first section deals with the condition of promise in verse 4a, the verse states, "For thus says Yahweh to the eunuchs, who keeps my Sabbath, who choose the things that pleases me, and hold fast my covenant." The verse here highlights God's acceptance is based on faithfulness and not on physical ability, not on nationality, or not on societal status. God outlines three conditions here for the eunuchs. The first is the Hebrew word shamar, meaning to keep, guard, or preserve. The phrase here, keep my Sabbath, signifies the loyalty to God and God's covenant. The faithfulness to the Sabbath became a declaration of allegiance to God, proving that their identity was no longer bounded by the exclusion, but by the obedience to God. The second is the verb shamar, bakar, meaning choose, which implies a lifelong commitment to God's will over societal expectation. And the final condition which God gave is hold fast my covenant, which uses the Hebrew word chazes, meaning cling tightly or remain steadfast. The grammatical form here, Hefil participle, indicates an active and continuous engagement in God's covenant. Scholar John Oswald notes that chazes in this verse emphasizes the relationship with God is not inherited but built on personal faithfulness. And having examined this condition, let us now turn to the second section, that is the reward of promise in verse 5a, where God continues with declaration, "I will give in my house and within my walls a monument and living declares, then sons and daughters." Here the phrase "in my house and within my walls," which signifies direct inclusion in God's presence, while a monument and a name represents lasting honor, surpassing even the value of the biological descendants. The Hebrew noun Shem means name, identity, reputation, and legacy. In biblical times, a person's name carried deep significance because it is tied with their honor, their lineage, and remembrance. And since eunuchs could not have children, they have no means of continuing their legacy. Yet, God promised them a name which is far better than the biological descendant, that is, one who is eternally established in God's kingdom rather than being limited by the worldly desires. And this leads us to the third section, which deals with the permanence of promise in verse 5b, where God concludes the declaration, "I will give them an everlasting name which will never be cut off." The final promise, which emphasizes the eternal natures of God's gift, Unlike earthly recognition, which fades away over time, the name given to the universe is everlasting. The Hebrew word olam actually means everlasting, forever, eternal, and without end. It conveys permanence beyond time. Charles Westerman notes that olam in this verse marks a permanent transformation of identity, showing that the unique's place in God's kingdom will never be removed. And this leads us to the last verb, which is karat, which means to cut, to remove, which is often used in the covenantal context. For eunuchs, the phrase shall not be cut off is very significant because they are once being cut off from the inheritance from the temple worship. Yet now God declares that they will never again experience separation. The inheritance is secured and their name will never be removed. Therefore, through this olam and karat, Isaiah 56 verse 5 concludes with God's unchanging, eternal, and irrevocable promise. Now that we have explored God's promise in Isaiah 56, what does it mean for us today? How can it be implied in our lives and in our church? Isaiah 56 teaches that our identity is rooted in God and not in the world. Many struggled with insignificance due to societal level, disability, infertility, past failures, or rejection. But God's promise defines us, not human limitation. More importantly, Isaiah 56 calls us to break cycles of exclusion and reflect God's inclusive heart in our churches and in our communities. But are we living beyond words? Even in our daily lives, the most basic things. Do we stand by our friends when they struggle, or do we pull them away when they fall short? Do we extend grace and encouragement, or do our words and our action contribute to the exclusion of others through rumors or through silent judgment? We celebrate achievements, but do we honor and recognize the widows, the disabled, the elderly, single parent, or those battling with loneliness and mental illness? Are we listening, including, and valuing them? It is easy to acknowledge people in sermon, but what are we doing beyond words? How can we as a church take real action to support those who feel forgotten? Isaiah 56 reminds us that God grants an everlasting name to those whom society ignores. If God honors them, shouldn't we? If God sees them, will we still choose to ignore them? This passage tells us to embrace the excluded, tear down walls of rejection, and trust in God's unshakable promise. Faith isn't just spoken, it is lived. Let us not just preach love, but let us embody it. May God give us the courage to break barriers, live the forgotten, and be a living reflection of God's unshakable love. And as we sing the song, Use Me God, let us ask God not to just use us in words, but in our action. Let us ask God to extend the divine love, tear down walls, embrace the outcast, and be an instrument of God's grace. And let this be our prayer and our commitment. Amen.
Use my life, Lord, to serve your people, and follow you wherever you may.